As we end Red Ribbon Week, it is our honor to introduce Eric Spofford, founder of Granite State Recovery Centers, with the opening of New Hampshire's first sober living home in 2008. Over the next 10 years, the company expanded to its current state, consisting of 2 residential primary care addiction treatment centers, 4 extended care facilities, 2 sober living facilities, and an intensive outpatient program, and a 9,000 square foot meeting and event center. In addition to owning and operating business in the commercial real estate and building and construction sectors, Mr. Spofford is intimately involved in every facet of Granite Recovery Center's operations. A recovered heroin addict and now sober for 12 years, Mr. Spofford is driven by his passion for helping others into and through addiction treatment, and then into leading productive, fulfilling, sober lives. So without further ado, Mr. Spofford.
What's up, Wyndham? I knew you guys were going to be a lively bunch. I was telling the office that this morning. Hang on, let me pop this off. Julie, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. As she said, my name's Eric Spofford. Professionally, I serve as a chief executive officer of an organization called Granite Recovery Centers, and we're New England's largest provider of substance abuse treatment, providing a full continuum of care, from detox to residential treatment to long-term transitional and sober living programs. But that's not why I'm here today. Why I'm here today is at the invitation of your school, and I guess I'm kind of riding the coattail of Red Ribbon Week, which focuses on some really important subjects. And, you know, I'm here as a guy in recovery, and what that means for me is that I am a drug addict. I'll be a drug addict for the rest of my life. But since December 7th of 2006, I haven't taken a mood or mind-altering substance, not a drink of alcohol or a drug, nothing. And, you know, that's a long story into how I got there, and I want to share a little bit of that with you guys this morning because I think it's incredibly important. You know, I was kind of sitting in the parking lot for a little bit before I came in here and thinking about what we were going to talk about this morning. And I do a fair amount of this, talking in different venues and schools and to politicians and to communities and all sorts of folks. And I got to be honest that there's this fear that lives inside of me for all of you, because whether you know it or not, you're growing up in an incredibly complex time, because it is, as we sit now, this world, this country, and this region is in the most addicted time it's ever been. It's never been worse for addiction and mental health than it is currently. And we're also in the middle of an opioid epidemic. How many of you have heard of the opioid epidemic? To raise your hands. Pretty much everybody. You know, when I was I grew up right next door in Salem, New Hampshire. You know, the house I grew up in is probably no more than 20 minutes from here. I went to Salem High. I came from a good family, mom and dad. I liked to race four-wheelers and, you know, fish as a kid. And, I did okay in school. And, I was just kind of a general kid. I got A's and B's, like to do, kid stuff. But I had this curiosity about me when it came to drugs and alcohol. And, when I was a young guy, there were people that were starting to drink. And that was the first thing that kind of showed up in my life. And one night we were hanging out at the Rockingham Mall. I don't know if kids still do that, but in my day, that's where we spent our time. And some older kids showed up, and I don't know, I was probably 13 years old at the time, and they showed up with vodka, and I mixed the drink with the Sprite and vodka, and, I drank alcohol, and, nothing terrible happened to me. I got drunk. I felt the effects of alcohol for the first time. And honestly, it was, I'm not going to lie, it was a good time. And it was in that I this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to drink, I'm going to party, and I start to do those things. And next for me, it was marijuana, it was weed. And when I was 14, almost 15 years old, I was at my father's house, and one of my friends that I grew up with my entire life, we were actually in the same first grade class together. His name was Matt. And Matt showed up at my house, and we were a couple kids making bad decisions, which is nothing earth-shattering. And at the time, I'm kind of dating myself here, but this is 1999. If you had an auditorium full of high school kids and said, had anyone heard of the opioid epidemic, people would have looked at you quietly and had no clue what you were talking about because it hadn't started yet. This is the very beginning of that. And Matt came over and he had a pill, and it was a painkiller. And he said, hey man, I got this thing, you want to try it with me? And we split the thing in half, and I tried it, and I felt the effects of opiates for the first time. One second. And what happened then was nothing. Again, like when I drank alcohol for the first time, I got high on opiates, I felt the effects of that, and I liked it. And drugs aren't drugs because they don't feel good. Drugs, are enticing because they alter our mood and our mind. And so, when I first started off, everything was fun, everything felt exciting. And what happened very quickly was that I continued to use those. I continued to get those pills. At the time, it was Oxycontin and Percocet. And I used them, and I used them, and I used them, and we partied, and we had fun. And then about 6 months later, I said, man, I've been doing these pills for too long. I've been doing them a lot. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to cool it off a little bit. I'm going to chill. And so I didn't use them. And, I went one day, and then the next morning I woke up, and I thought I had the flu. And I spent about half the day progressively getting sicker and sicker, and I'm throwing up, and I got the chills and the sweats. And another friend of mine, Dominic, came over. And, he had been doing this thing a little longer than me, using and abusing drugs. He said, man, what's wrong? I said, dude, I don't feel good. He says, well, when's the last time you did an oxy? I said, I don't know, 2 days ago. And he said, man, you're in withdrawals, you're dope sick. And I was probably 16 years old at that point, 15, almost 16. And it was in that moment that I realized that I'd become an addict. And the problem with that is that I didn't want to be an addict, but knowing that I was an addict wasn't enough to not be one, and it wasn't enough to keep me away from drugs. I'd already crossed this imaginary line in the sand that once you get onto the other side of it, there's no coming back, and that's why I sit here, 33 years old, with almost 12 years of sobriety, and tell you I'm a drug addict, because I crossed that line a very long time ago, and I'm never coming back. And for me, recovery is possible. I've been sober for a very long time now. I will live the rest of my life like that and continue to practice recovery. But what happened was that Oxycontin and Percocet turned into heroin because I had a physical addiction and I couldn't not use. If I didn't use, I got sick. And the pills weren't always around, and then they got really expensive because my tolerance grew and I needed more of them. And then heroin was around and it was cheaper. And so I started using heroin. And what pursued over the next 6 years was heroin addiction, homelessness, jail. I've overdosed 5 times and survived. Waking up on life support in Parkland Medical Center to both of my parents crying, and I'm 135 pounds and I've been living out on the street. And, I tried getting sober over and over and over again. I constantly wanted to make, better choices in my life. But the problem for me was that I had gone too far. And that's why I think the importance of this conversation that we're having today is that for most of you, if not all, you haven't gone there yet. I can tell you the stereotype that exists out there of what a heroin addict is, of what a drug addict is, and it's just not true. I was a good kid. Growing up, the last thing in the world I ever thought I was going to be was a drug addict. When I started drinking, I never thought it was going to ruin my life. When I tried that first pill, I never thought it was going to take me for a ride that I almost didn't get off of. And so the realities of this isn't, I'm not some guy from Boston and New York or, a speaker they flew in. My house is like 10 minutes from here. I grew up here. And this is in your backyard. I want to make that connection for you guys, that this isn't something that you're not going to have to deal with or you're not going to know. You talk to most adults in their 20s, 30s, and 40s and ask them, how many people do you know that's been affected by addiction? You would have a hard time finding someone that doesn't know somebody. And especially in Wyndham, I know. So what ends up happening, I'll circle back to that. What ends up happening is that I go through this about 6, almost 7-year battle with heroin. And eventually in 2006, thank God that I found recovery, and I've been in, consistent sobriety and recovery since. And then times changed though. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, what was real heroin, basically disappeared. The dealers didn't have heroin anymore, and now they started mixing it or selling fentanyl. Have you guys heard of fentanyl? Can you raise your hands? Just want to see how many people. And so, addiction was bad enough because it'll grab a hold of you, and it's like, if you're driving in your car, and your car is your life, and you have the steering wheel, and you get to drive this thing wherever you want to go, and if that's you want to drive it to college, you get to go to college, and if you want to date and get married and have kids, and if you want to be an engineer, an architect, a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever else it is, you can go do those things. And when addiction kicks in, you're the last one to know it, and it pushes you into the backseat of your own car. And all of a sudden, where addiction's driving you is the places that it drove me. It's driving you to jail, it's driving you to the street, it's driving you to steal from your family, steal from your friends. And I know that's kind of hard for someone that hasn't experienced it to really understand that lack and loss of control over your life, but that is addiction. And that, addiction is defined by powerlessness. And for that reason, that the recovery rates, quite frankly, aren't all that good. And so I hope you can kind of take my story and look at the decisions you're making now and remember this conversation moving forward when you're invited to that party in the woods and they're going to drink. Because when I was invited to the party in the woods and we were going to drink, I didn't realize that for me and a lot of other kids, that was going to end up in addiction. Or when you offered the joint, or the Adderall, or the prescription pill. And this thing isn't entirely about opiates, or opioids, or fentanyl, or heroin addiction. It's really all drugs, I know people that suffer from alcoholism at a very young age, that, they started drinking, and with booze, they crossed across that imaginary line, and then never come back. They'll be an alcoholic for the rest of their lives. And so when fentanyl hit the scene, 6 or 7 years ago, and I'm in recovery, and, I work in the treatment industry, so I'm surrounded by a lot of drug addicts all the time, every day, and overdose deaths started to spike. And it changed the entire landscape of addiction here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is actually one of the worst states per capita for overdoses in the entire country. And all those kids that I grew up with right next door in Salem High, and at the time, you guys didn't have this high school. You guys came to school with us over in Salem. So a lot of kids from Wyndham, too, that we started off, drinking and smoking pot and doing the pills, and then, harder drugs, heroin. They all died. And I know that's a bold and dramatic statement, but I'm not kidding. And I'm like I said, I'm 33 years old, and almost everybody that I used drugs with as a teenager has passed away at a very young age. And which quite frankly was devastating to me. That's not an experience as a young guy that you're supposed to go with, is to watch your peers pass away. That's a late stage end of life thing. I watched my grandmother, who died in her mid-70s, and her sisters and her friends and all these people start to pass away. And I watched that experience for her at the end of her life. And I went through that in my late 20s and early 30s. And so I guess how that translates to how that's useful or practical for you guys sitting in this room is what I really need you to know is that it changed the stakes of the game altogether. In that what once was, it would just put you in the backseat of your own car and ruin your life. Now it's going to put you in the backseat of your own car, ruin your life, and it's going to kill you pretty quickly. And, I wish that was different. I wish that that wasn't the conversation that we were here to have today. And I wish that I didn't have to be so direct and blunt about that information, but I sit in a place where I've seen overdose death kill, at this point, hundreds of people. I can tell you stories about people from Wyndham. My buddy Chad Markovitz, he lived on Range Road. He died, he was 27 years old, I believe. My buddy Gary DiMartino, he lived over on Corbett's Pond. He died at 30, 3 years ago. He's got a little girl, Maria. I still bring my son to her birthday parties because her dad's not around anymore. This is real life, My buddy Zach O'Brien, he came to high school here. He was a younger guy. He died a couple of years ago. And these are real Wyndham kids, This is in this town. Unfortunately, it's in every town. It's nothing bad about Wyndham. It's just that addiction does not discriminate. It does not, it doesn't care what your dad does for work. It doesn't care what neighborhood you live in. It doesn't care that you come to nice Wyndham High School or you're from, you did sports or whatever else it is. This idea that it's, in the other town, it's, in the poorer neighborhoods, it's in those people over there is just not true anymore. And it hasn't been true for a very long time. Addiction does not discriminate against socio and economic lines. And so, advice for you. There's the information. Addiction is out there, it's real. Excuse me. And how does that translate for what you guys do? I want to tie this story and the stories I'm telling you into the decisions you're making right now. You hear a lot of things like, marijuana is a gateway drug. That's true. I'll tell you the cold hard truth about that is not everybody that did marijuana when I grew up ended up a heroin addict, but absolutely everybody that ended up a heroin addict or a hardcore drug addict started with marijuana. Same goes for alcohol. And the thing, it's just a very slippery slope that is, one bad decision after the next and a steady loss of control and where you lose fear for this thing. And what I mean by that is, when you go out there and you party for the first time or, you drink or you smoke your first joint, if you make those bad decisions, the next ones come that much easier. So what I mean by that also is that my journey through addiction was continually this story, this lie that I would tell myself with, okay, I'll do that, but I'm never going to. And I continually broke those promises to myself. I would drink, but I wasn't going to smoke. I would smoke, but I wasn't going to do pills. I was going to do pills, but I'd never snort anything. I was going to snort something, but I was never going to shoot it. And all of a sudden, I was an IV drug addict. It was the last thing I ever expected. I got about 10 minutes left, I guess. And I'd love to hear from you guys, if that's okay. Do we have any questions? Did a hand up over here earlier? What's up, brother? I'm good. How are you? Yeah, absolutely. If you think you're suffering with addiction or alcoholism or substance use disorder, or you have a friend or a loved one that's suffering with this thing, you can absolutely call us. Our website is graniterecoverycenters.com. There's a phone number on there that has a team of people 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. That are just there and ready to assist and help you guys. So please use us as a resource and call anytime. We'd be happy to help. I'm sorry, can you speak up just a little bit? Well, I agree with you. I think it'd be really nice if drugs didn't exist too. Um, and I appreciate your empathy for myself and other people that have been afflicted with addiction. And please don't mistake that. I live a very good life today, but that's a result of recovery. And I guess I'd flip that thing where I really want to smash down this perception of that these problems are going to happen to other people. Like, I promise you that, as you guys grow up in this school and go off to college or whatever you're going to do when you leave here, that you're going to know people that are affected with addiction, that this is such a common problem in our community here that you're going to need to know where the resources are. You're going to need to educate yourself, because if it's not you, it's going to be somebody that you care about. The statistics just say that, right? Anyone else? We got one up there? Try and speak up so I can hear you, brother. Say that one more time. Yes, I have been. Is there anything further about that question? I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah. Explain the effects on someone overdosing on the family members? Yeah. How I kind of see this thing, all right, come on, settle down, guys. How I see this thing is that, very similar to somebody that goes off to war and is in the trenches and on the battlefield and sees all the horrific things of war and then comes back on leave and to tell his friends and family and community about what that's like. That's how I feel with the opioid epidemic being here today. That I'm absolutely boots on the ground. I've seen a lot of people overdose. I've seen a lot of people survive overdoses as a result of Narcan, the reversal drug. I've also overdosed and survived 5 times myself. And I've seen a lot of people overdose and not survive. The effects on the family members, and I guess you won't know pain in your life until you look into the eyes of a mom or a dad that has lost their child from a drug overdose, which unfortunately I've done many, many times. It leaves a void that's just unexplainable. I have a whole bunch of little kids who are growing up without their moms or growing up without their dads as a result of this thing. I got a lot of friends that are, moms and dads themselves that lost their children to overdose. And, there's no way to dress that thing up. I'm sorry that's affected you in your life, but you're not alone, right? And that pain is absolutely real. And so it's tough, I can tell you that your decisions, your parents and your families and your loved ones, your decisions now not only have the power to change your life forever, but also change your family members' lives forever. When someone suffers with addiction or substance use disorder, that person isn't the only one that's affected. Those bad decisions brings you into a quicksand that sucks your entire family and friends in with you. And the pain just doesn't stop with you. It certainly affects them. Anyone else before we wrap up? Guys, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time and attention. You've been great. Thank you.